In the name of the Father, and the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. This is a reading from the Gospel of John, chapter 14. If you love me, you will keep my commandments, and I will ask the Father, and he will give you another advocate to be with you always, referring, of course, to the Holy Spirit. The Spirit of truth, which the world cannot accept because it neither sees nor knows it, but you know it because it remains with you and will be in you. I will not leave you orphans. I will come to you. One of the things before we tackle the commandments tonight, I want to emphasize, and I've touched on this before, is the whole idea that the moral life, which is what the commandments kind of are the bedrock guide to, the moral life is the law of love. In other words, if you want to know what love looks like, be moral. It's that simple, okay? So tonight, what we're going to do, since I have you 2 weeks in a row, I have commandments 1 through 3 and 4 through 6. 1 through 3 tonight. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on kind of, we've touched on this a little bit before, but the moral and natural law and all that sort of stuff, eternal law. And then we'll go into those commandments. And then next week, we'll pick up and we'll spend a little time on conscience and then go into commandments 4, 5, and 6. And because it's 2 weeks in a row, if we get ahead, we'll go a little farther. If we don't finish, we'll pick it up. I love that freedom of time. So tonight, again, the moral act and the natural law. Okay. Let me start with a question for you. Is your dog, now with apologies to those of you who own cats, is your dog moral? Okay, now I'm getting head shaking in both directions. All right. Have any of you who own dogs ever said, bad dog, when you're training them? Sure. But is your dog moral? No, not really. Morality, moral acts are made by persons with minds and wills who can think and who can choose, okay? Your dog, even though it's among the more intelligent of animals, is really operating essentially on instinct. There's hints of intelligence there and so forth. But I always remember my next door neighbor's dog wasn't the brightest in the collection of dogs. His father put out a bowl of food for the dog, and he was working on some screens out on his porch. So he had a box of staples, and the dog starts chewing on the box of staples. We'd say, dumb dog. Well, again, we want to be careful not to ascribe too many human traits to animals. So the moral act is the acts of the human person that have to do with morality. Now, are all acts moral? Do they all fall into moral categories? No. Okay. Let's say you went to the ice cream stand. Okay. I'll ask just a sample in the front row. Just give me your favorite flavor of ice cream. Chocolate.
Mint chocolate chip.
Mint chocolate chip. Vanilla. Cookies and cream. Okay. Well, being a chocoholic, I'm with you. So these people obviously are wrong. Well, no, it isn't that way at all. This is an aesthetic choice. I may wonder why anyone would necessarily pick vanilla as a top flavor. There's nothing wrong with vanilla if you put enough chocolate on it. It's great. Or maybe even some fruit. That's an aesthetic question. It's not a moral one. Okay? So, moral acts are those that have to do with what is good or what is maybe not good. Now, moral decisions go further than that. We sometimes think morality is always about choosing right and wrong. Sometimes a moral decision is about choosing good or better. If one of you were offered 2 jobs simultaneously coming out of college, you were that hot a prospect, that decision might have some moral tones to it. You might have to think about that in light of your vocation, your circumstance in life. Which job should I take? Okay. Which would be the better? That's a moral decision then. Okay. We'll talk about natural law and the other levels of law a little bit. We'll talk about a term maybe you haven't used, orthodoxy. How many of you are familiar with orthodox or orthodoxy? What do we mean by that? Don't all jump at once. Okay. You haven't heard that this year?
They're very traditional.
Not traditional necessarily. It's associated with traditional, but it's not inherent to that. Orthodox is essentially that right thinking. You got it right. What do you think orthopraxis is? Yes. In other words, do you live the orthodoxy? If you know something is right or wrong, you should either seek it or avoid it. I'm just going to throw a wild guess out there. Probably most of you, at least on one or two occasions, have known the right thing to do and have not done it. I certainly have had occasions of that. That's orthopraxy. Have I done what is right? And then again, over the next 2 weeks, we'll look at commandments 1 through 6. Now, commandments 1 through 3, we're going to touch on tonight, certainly. And the first 3 commandments have to do with our relationship with God. Okay? We want to think of God, too, as reality itself. Okay? If there's no God, none of this. Have you ever heard, well, out in the real world, you know, and oftentimes people associate that with business, with the rough and tumble world of politics, or, you know, name whatever field. That's not the real world, really. The real world is God. He's given us all of this. So he's what's ultimate. He's the ultimate reality. Okay? In fact, do you remember how he described himself when Moses asked him, who do I tell them you are? What did he say? I am who I am. And another translation of that is, I am. I'm existence itself. Without God, there's no existence. That's one of the kind of fundamentals of understanding him. So we're really dealing about reality. All right, let's move on here. I'd love to say I drew this up myself, but I actually stole it. My son is a theologian as well, and I saw this in one of his slideshows and I grabbed it. Okay, he's better at this stuff than I am. Okay, and I know I've touched on this a little bit, perhaps some of the others have as well. And this looks complex at first. It really isn't at all, okay? This is just understanding the 4 levels of law that you and I essentially deal with. Eternal law is that perfect order, that perfect wisdom that's present in God himself. If we think of before creation, Father, Son, and Spirit living eternally in perfect order, perfect harmony, perfect love. That's the eternal law. Everything is just the way it should be. It's pure love. Okay? Life within the Trinity. Now, divine law, the next level down, that is that part of the eternal law that God has chosen to reveal to us. Okay. Now, a number of things we'll talk about fall into that category. The commandments, the Beatitudes, the whole life of Christ, the prophets of the Old Testament, even creation in a certain sense reveals this. Divine law. Natural law, okay? Natural law is that part of eternal law or divine law, those laws above it, if you will, that you could know with human reason alone. You don't need God to reveal this to you. Now, I think we did talk about this one time when I was here. Thou shalt not steal. Since I won't get to teach you that, that falls into the third set of the commandments. Thou shalt not steal. How many of you think you knew that even if you had no exposure to anything seriously religious? How many of you think, I know that was off? What's that?
At what age?
Oh, let's say by the age of reason, beyond age 7. Yeah, chances are you would. Maybe not perfectly, but you'd know to take the goods of another, this isn't right. Okay? Natural law is very important. We'll talk about why in a moment. Natural law is defined as that immutable. Immutable is just another word for unchanging. The natural law doesn't change. Eternal part of the divine law, which is discernible by human reason without revelation. In other words, we can know this natural. Okay? We can know this through our own nature. And the fourth level, the lowest level, is civil law. Okay? Civil law. Y'all know what we mean by civil law? So, for example, how many sets of civil law do you live under living here, let's say in the St. Louis Park, Minnesota area? What levels of government are above you? Municipal, state, federal, and one more. Well, national, federal would be, I guess I was assuming that. That's good. We've left one out though. City, that'd be municipal. County, yes. Now, this again varies for people living under different governmental systems. I grew up in Connecticut. We have 8 counties in Connecticut. All they are is lines on a map. There is no county government at all. So we have federal, state, and municipal. That's it. We don't have any county. If you ever wonder, are we really under county law? Look at your tax bill. That tells you, right? We're in that wonderful time of year when we're all filling out our taxes and perhaps getting impatient. But the government spends our money so well. We should. No, I'm sorry. I'm misbehaving. All kinds of civil laws. I won't ask for a confession for how many of you are maybe running a little late, maybe violated a municipal law or maybe even a state law on your way here. Did you perfectly stay under the speed limit all the way? Everything from tax laws to, how do you keep your pets, like that. Can any of you think, for example, of if your own town or municipality has a kind of quirky law that's maybe hard to live by?
Whether you can have chickens or not?
Yes, that became really big about a year ago. Remember when egg prices went to the moon and people were starting to take up, and then people, of course, you think, I'm going to get cheaper eggs and they're going to be better and healthy and all that. And then your neighbors start complaining about them, going off at 5 a.m. Okay. Yeah. You get that. There's all kinds of quirky laws around. Okay. Now you'll notice a little something added to this. Some civil laws are unjust. The majority of them are probably just fine. But some of them are unjust, and those are the ones that fall outside of the 3 laws above. Okay? When our civil laws, whatever they are, fall outside of the realm of these 3, we've got a few chairs, guys. If we could even squeeze you together over here. Okay. So, can anyone think, for example, in our own country, an unjust law? Sorry, they're giving out candy later on this side. You're benefiting. So, can anybody think of a law in our own country or state that is unjust?
I think there is one that I found, I don't know if it's unjust, but it's weird. One of my neighbors had just bought another house
Mm-hmm.
in his lot, basically, but it's whatever. He cannot rent out that property unless he takes like a course that he had to pay some lessons to be CP rent.
Okay, so
And like, I get like if you need to pass a test, I learn the laws or something like that, but no, he has to pay for a course
a course
to rent.
to be able to rent his property out.
Mhm.
Yeah. Zoning laws certainly could have areas that flirt with injustice. Can you think of any other laws in our state, country, that are not just?
We have laws that permit abortion.
Yeah, abortion laws, classic. In other words, we can kill the innocent. We'll talk about that next week. But that's an unjust law. Okay. We can get into, some other things. There are some laws that are probably debatable in terms of their application, how they might be used, things like that. When we think of the fraud that we're dealing with here locally, we're kind of an epicenter of that. At least the first one being exposed. We'd certainly say there's some immorality going on there on a grand scale. But you may sometimes discover within fraud, it seems that some of these laws were badly written and badly put out, or certainly badly either written or enforced. Okay, they hopefully out of that we'll get some cleanup. But yeah, if a law jumps outside, let's go to a stark example. If we think of Nazi Germany, when they began to pass all kinds of laws, at first it was predominantly against Jews, but it got to others as well. And we know historically looking at it, this was not about trying to create a good, healthy, orderly society. This was about taking a class of people or several classes of people and wiping them out, greatly reducing their population, stealing their wealth. That's a big part of what it was about. It was designed to advantage those in power, immoral. Okay. So I don't want to get lost into civic law, but there's lots and lots and lots and lots of civic laws. There are religious laws. Okay. Religion has laws. Do any of you belong to any kind of organization, let's say a secular organization like the Moose or the Squirrel? No, I don't know. The Lions, or does anybody belong to an outside organization that they have some laws that you can think of? None of you belong to any outside organizations? Okay, it looks like something's bad. If I could ask you to share. American Legion, okay. Do they have some requirements of members? Yeah. Okay, yeah. And we join those, and if you join those, you normally accept kind of what they're asking you to do. There's a lot of service organizations out there that expect you to either donate or time, talent, whatever, to do it. And that's fine. We voluntarily join them and we accept those things. It doesn't mean that over time we may not say, hey, this thing we've been doing, maybe we ought to change that. And then you can work within the organization to do that. But again, we live under all kinds of laws. Okay. Well, let's get some truly classical understanding of these laws. And perhaps the best at all of this was Thomas Aquinas, the great theologian, philosopher, the most systematic mind I've ever seen. The 4 characteristics of a law. 1, it's an ordinance of reason. In other words, it needs to be something thought out. Okay? Have you ever heard of a law that was passed that ended up producing the opposite result that a governing body of some type sought to bring about? Happens not infrequently. They pass a law with the intention of doing X, and it ends up doing the opposite. Okay? Probably not a good law. Okay? Laws must protect an objective value. They cannot be simply the arbitrary will of the authority. Okay? Must be rooted in the truth. Otherwise, it's not going to be good law. Second, he said, it must exist for the common good. Law seeks a just society for all citizens, not just for the good of some. Okay? Not just for the good of some. Can you think of any laws that have ever been passed that were designed this way for the good of some?
Tax laws.
Certainly at times. Slavery laws, allowing slavery. Even some of the laws now, ironically, that seek to create protected classes around, maybe because of past persecutions and things like that. Not just. Good law should be able to be applied to everyone, not just to a few. If you think of, for example, in our own country, some of the laws that have applied to Native Americans. Now, certainly they got a great deal of mistreatment along the way. And we've tried to kind of protect a kind of nation status within a nation within a nation. But if you study the history of many of the laws, and particularly their effects on our Native American reservations, it's not a pretty picture. So I think there has been some issues. Not that you cannot have them. They are a little bit separate from us. Canada has that more pronounced if you ever go up there. They refer to them as nations up there. So a little different. But again, trying to grapple with past ills is oftentimes a great challenge. Moral laws should be directed to the happiness of all human persons. Okay. Are made by those who are responsible for the care of the community. You cannot make a law unless you have that legitimate authority to do so. Okay? You have to be a legislator. One who has the power to execute laws, that would be the executive branches in our governmental system. It includes God's laws and human laws. Finally, they have to be officially promulgated. They have to be made known, okay, in a legitimate manner to those under its jurisdiction. Have any of you ever been caught in a speed trap driving? Maybe you're driving in an unfamiliar area, and all of a sudden you come around the corner and the speed went from 60 down to 25 and 6 feet. Well, most braking systems can't accomplish that. I once had that happen driving on a long trip to another state. I didn't appreciate it. It's not proper. Okay. It clearly was a trap. Okay. Again, laws should be known and promulgated in such a way that they don't surprise us. Now, that doesn't mean we can run around being ignorant to the law and just claim that either. You know, we have an obligation. I won't go too long on this. I'm just going to skim through it. But again, eternal law is nothing other than the plan of divine wisdom is directing all acts and movements. If you're acting like God, if you're acting in love, true love, you don't need to spend a lot of time worrying about laws. You'll follow them. Okay, and again, it's the laws of the cosmos, primordial law, foundation. It's kind of intrinsic to the whole universe. Okay, very universal in its application. Eternal law, okay, is revealed, becomes, of course, divine law. Okay, and again, Aquinas puts those reasons behind it. Human beings' last end, in other words, what are we here for? Okay, our last end is eternal happiness. Okay, now is there anybody here in the financial world? I think I asked this question last time. Anybody works in finance? Okay, you did. Okay, now were you like in investment finance, that kind of thing, or in accounting finance, or investment? Okay, so you had a goal to help your clients or people in whatever way you did it to try to enhance their wealth. Okay, perfectly good occupation. Is that the end of life? Is that the goal of our whole human life? Did you ever meet anyone who took it with them? No. You know, they all think you can't take any of this with you. Okay. And so again, Um, our goal is eternal, and we can't forget that. And that's why good law of all times is so critical. Why do we have law? Well, human judgment is uncertain. Okay, we remember the fall. We studied way back last fall. We don't always see things clearly. We don't have perfect 2020 foresight. Human judgment is uncertain. It must be a law that humans can be certain of as it pertains to final judgment. In other words, as God has taught this, as the church has discerned it, as God has revealed it, we follow that, we'll be on solid ground. Even if it doesn't quite make sense to us. Okay. Do you remember when you were maybe a young adolescent and your parents put a restriction on you and you couldn't understand it? Why are they doing this? Well, those of you who are have been on the parent side know there's a real good reason why I didn't let Jimmy drive the car at 14 when he wanted to. Okay. Aside from being against the law, there are other things. Okay. Humans cannot judge interior movements and intent. This is one of the major reasons. We talked about this a little before class. We don't try to judge the intentions of another. We're not very good at judging the intentions of another. We're not even always that good at judging our own intentions. Human laws cannot forbid all evil deeds. If you live in a society that has the attitude it's going to try to prevent all evil deeds, what are you going to be buried alive in? Laws. You're going to have law after law after law after law after law. Some have said the United States is a little bit like that. The old saying, G.K. Chesterton once said about U.S. law, he says, Americans have lots and lots of laws and lots of little laws. You know, I'm thinking about your zoning law thing there. And why do you tend in any society to get lots of little laws? Because people are breaking the big ones. And then you add more laws to try to further enforce it. Okay. Natural law, we've talked about, and now let's just touch on why it's so important before we get into the commandments. We live in a very pluralistic society, don't we? Very pluralistic. We have thousands of religions. We have all kinds of other kinds of things. We don't have unity of opinion on much of anything. This is true of the modern world in most cases. So we can't necessarily agree, if I went back to the diagram on what eternal law is, because we got people running around, there is no eternal law, there's no God. So that disappears. And they'd say, therefore, there is no divine law. So what are we left with? Natural law. On that, we ought to be able to disagree or find a certain amount of agreement on from which we can build a framework of laws for a healthy society. The first time I saw in our own country people began to seriously attack natural law was when they tried to legalize, and they succeeded at legalizing abortion. They had to twist the natural law away because most people could see, hey, this is a dark alley. Unfortunately, we've borne some very dark fruit because of that. Okay? Natural law is written in the heart of every human being as it applies to human life. It has two characteristics. It's universal and it's unchanging. In other words, it gives a basic bedrock that we can govern a pluralistic society from. When we act against the natural law, we do oppose human happiness. That's ultimately what we're talking about. I think I asked you the first week I was here, do you want to be happy? And I was almost hoping I'd get someone who would raise their hand and say no. And at which point I'd recommend you to a psychiatrist because you're beyond my help. Universally, we want to be happy. Even when we do things that harm us, we're usually doing it seeking some kind of good, or at least a perceived good. So again, laws created by and proclaimed for good of the human person. That's what we're getting at here in civil law. It's the way it ought to be. Good, there's a lot of good civil law. Okay. Is there anybody here who comes from a country where you drove on the other side of the road? Nobody. Okay. Is driving on the correct side of the road kind of important, do you think, as far as a civil law? Okay. How many of you live far enough away that if that law were suddenly off the books, you could drive any direction you wanted to go on the pavement? How many of you would be at risk trying to get home? Yeah, if you're probably driving more than a couple of miles on back roads, you're probably, you don't want this. Okay. Those are good laws. Now, has anybody here ever gone to a country where you drive on the other side of the road and driven there? Okay. Takes a little getting used to. A lot. I only did it in Ireland, and I was fine the whole time, except I spent one evening with a bunch of Americans. We went out for Irish music. I had a beer or two. I wasn't cockeyed or anything, but I was just used to being an American. It was a rainy Friday night. I had several guests in the back of my tiny little car, and we drove out, and I took a hard right, like I normally do in America. And I saw all kinds of headlights flying at me. Okay, and I managed to get over to the left side. Okay, I was fine with it, but it really matters. Okay, so again, human law is susceptible to injustice due to the fact that its authors, people like you and I, are affected by the consequences of original sin. Okay. All right. Well, one more before we get to the commandments. Ultimately, this is about freedom and responsibility. What does authentic freedom look like? We talked about what love looks like. What does authentic freedom look about? Well, let's try that adolescent again. Those of you out there who are parents, if you can remember when your children were adolescents, what do you think their idea of freedom was, put in simple language?
Do whatever they want.
Do whatever they want. Or some have defined it a little more tightly. I can do what I want, how I want, and when I want. Okay? Now, we've probably all relished moments when we were kind of on our own and we could kind of do what we want. But in the long run, that doesn't work. That's not freedom. That will usually result in disorder and chaos. Authentic freedom is the freedom to do what is truly good. In other words, the freedom to love. Okay? Go back to Genesis 1. God, in Genesis 1, takes a chaotic universe and puts it into an orderly fashion. He turns it from chaos into order. He separates this from that. Okay? His laws, you see, are permeating the universe from its creation. He gives us commandments, which we'll start on in a minute, so that we can conform our lives to his freely. This is not forcing. Okay? Forcing doesn't work anyway. These commands will lead us to happy. You keep the 10 commandments, you're going to live a relatively happy life. Okay? Or as the Catechism says, God created man a rational being, conferring on him the dignity of a person, that is, the capacity to think and choose, so that he might, of his own accord, seek his Creator and freely attain his full and blessed perfection by cleaving or clinging tightly to him. Freedom, then, any freedom we have, makes us responsible for our actions. Those of you who have raised children, and maybe they're pretty grown up or completely grown up by now, what do you think the worst thing parents can do for their children as they're raising them? Now, I'm sure there's a number of nominations out there. Yes?
I'm not a parent, but I'd say not disciplining them.
Not disciplining them. But let's try to kind of thread that out a little bit. Trying to be their friend. Now, ultimately, you want to be their true friend. But that, usually when you're raising adolescents, they don't fully appreciate the friendship side of it. But let's go back to what you said. Could you repeat it again? If you fail to discipline them, okay? Now, let's try to develop an understanding of what we mean here. Let's see if we can define discipline them. What does that mean?
Having boundaries.
Boundaries, yeah.
And rules and consequences.
Consequences, yeah, they're a good thing for children, especially.
Teaching them right from wrong.
Yeah, developing their conscience, helping them to recognize right and wrong before they crash into it.
Correcting a behavior that's deemed bad.
Yeah, if they've got a trait that isn't terribly positive and you see a pattern of that, you want to go to work on it. I think the hardest part about being a parent is when I saw that in my own children and realized where they learned it from. Yeah, you see it, and I don't really like that. And then about 2 seconds later, it hits you where they learned it. Ooh, that puts the fork in deep. Yeah. Because if you think about it, I'm going to take what you said and just put a slight tweak on it. Discipline is what you want to give them so that they have the capacity to control themselves. That's ultimately how you're trying to pass this on, okay? That they'll govern themselves. Now, as you're raising children, you can't give them the whole enchilada when they're 2 years old, okay? I have a 2-year-old granddaughter, just turned 2. Love her dearly. She's a sweetheart. But she's curious as heck and heads into all kinds of things. You're cooking something on the stove. She's curious and she heads over. What's that up there? No, harshly, get back. Don't want that. You have to put in many more restrictions and then you ease up to a degree. But again, always responsibility. Okay, I'm going to ask just the guys a question here. It's unfair to do that. I'm sure there's a girl or two who was this way as well. How many of you, when you first got your license, guys, drove a little faster than intelligent? Sure. Okay. Maybe more than a little faster at times. Now, my top speed was 105. In a car that I didn't think it could go 105. Yeah, I shouldn't have done that. That was not smart. Not smart. Could have gotten myself killed. Not responsible. Not responsible. Ultimately, we need to be responsible. Freedom and responsibility always go together. If we do not exercise our freedom reasonably, responsibly, eventually, sooner or later, consequences come. Okay? Again, the purpose of a law is to allow the people in society a proper measure of freedom. Again, it's not we're free to do anything. To protect their rights and to remind them of their responsibilities to others. Let's start with the very simple concept of justice. Could someone give me a good short definition of justice? You hear people screaming about justice all the time, right? Usually if they're screaming about it, it's probably not justice. Harrison.
Doing what's right.
Okay, let's go a little further. Let's take it just a little deeper.
Punishment equals the crime.
Say that again.
Punishment equals the crime.
Punishment equals crime. Okay, in the case of criminal justice, something like that, yeah.
Ensuring the well-being
Of
somebody,
somebody else.
society, would be the
Okay, make it societal. A simple definition of justice for me or for you is, what do I owe those around me? Okay, what do I owe those around me? That's the first responsibility of justice that we all have. Not am I getting everything I want or I need, but what do I owe those around me? Start with your adolescent again, with apologies. Civil behavior. I always remember the first time I let my eldest daughter go to a sleepover. She was probably about 10, 11. What's the one thing they don't do at most sleepovers? Sleep. Yeah, so she got home at 8 o'clock or 10 o'clock in the morning, whatever it was, I don't remember. And she was grumpy all day. So I laid down my first law on sleepovers. They will not happen until a later age, and they will only happen maybe in summer or during vacations. They will never happen even on a weekend during the school year. Why? And she was, oh, well, how can you be that? I said, look, you came home and treated the entire family like something you stepped in because you were tired and grumpy. I said, we're not going to live with that. That's the consequence of what you did. Okay? So again, justice is what we owe to others first. Do we work for the injustices towards others, that something might happen? Sure. But again, if we're always screaming justice for ourselves, I think we're trying to get an advantage somehow. Okay, let's get into the commandments here before our night is past. Okay. So we're dealing with 3 commandments tonight that deal with our relationship with God. This is our most foundational relationship. Okay? If we get this one right, really right, if we got it thoroughly right, we probably wouldn't need the other 7 commandments. We'll talk about that next week. I am the Lord your God. Sorry. We are fallen and flawed, especially me. I am the Lord your God. Oh my gosh, I really butchered this. You shall not have strange gods before me. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. Okay. The commandments are found in 2 books of the Old Testament. Exodus, where they were promulgated as the Israelites were on their exodus out of Egypt, eventually leading to the Holy Land, the Promised Land, Israel, call it what you will. You also find them in Deuteronomy. Now, Deuteronomy simply means kind of second code. It's where they were rewritten and sometimes a bit more thoroughly explained or tightly explained. Okay, so if you see different translations, it's probably coming out of one or the other. Okay. We see the parting of the Red Sea here in artistic form. When God led the Israelites out of Egypt, how did he do it? Without getting into any specifics, because there were a whole bunch of events. How did God get them out of the slavery of Egypt, the bondage of Egypt? A series of miracles and interventions. Parting the Red Sea, no small task. Okay? Only God can do that kind of stuff. The plagues, only God could have done that. And then in the Exodus itself, he fed them. Because you're not going to feed, they estimate, but these are very gross estimates, there were at least 600,000 Jews who came out of Egypt. Can you imagine trying to feed them in the Sinai desert? No chance. You're not going to live off the land. He fed them. He took care of them. He intervened for them a number of times. Again, that's a whole set of readings you can do in Scripture. He's reminding them, I'm the one who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Do you remember how I did this? In other words, do you remember who I am? Okay. I'm the only God here. Okay. Have any of you ever seen the old movie Rudy? It's about a Notre Dame football player who got in 2 plays, I think, in his entire career. But in order to be considered a true Notre Dame football player, that's all he wanted to be. You had to play in a game. You had to be on the field. And he got in his last game, and they got him in, and he did. Now the story, I understand, is a little warped in the movie, but it did happen. He goes to a Monsignor who he's struggling. He's trying to get into Notre Dame. He's trying to get on the team, all this stuff. And he goes to this guy and he gives him some wonderful advice. He said he was struggling in the admissions because he was not doing that well in school. And the guy said to him, he says, Rudy, I've learned 2 things. He said, there is a God and I'm not him. Now, I've heard that in so many different dimensions over the course of things I read. It's one of the most fundamental things to realize. We're not God. We have a tendency to think like it or act like it, but we're not God. That's what he's reminding him here. I'm God. Sorry, you didn't come out of there alone. I led you out. I've done all this. I'm God. You're not. I'm the creator. I'm the origin. I'm existence itself. You're not. So this is where, when we forget that, we have a tendency not to keep God first in our lives. Okay? Easy to do. We've all done it. If any of you haven't sinned, I'd like to talk to you after class. Okay? Anytime we sin, in a certain sense, we violate commandment number 1. We decide to go some direction away from God and do it my way. It affirms, I am the Lord your God who created us in his image, gifted us with the whole created order, and the created order is for us, saved us at the cost of his own life, okay, and seeks union with us because he wants to, in a certain sense, divinize our humanity. It reminds us that charity loves God above all things. Okay, real charity, real love, loves God first. What does it oppose? Okay, if that's what it affirms, what does it oppose? Do not have strange gods before me, in other words. That's what it's getting against. In Egypt, they had all these gods, most of whom were based off of animals, who were not gods, they were human creations. And this is why God systematically, as he went through the plagues, kind of dissed all that away. Okay? He went against the polytheism that was common in the ancient world and idolatry, the worship of man-made things. Those things fall into the trap of divinizing creation. Now, can we see the hand of the Creator in creation? I think if you look carefully at creation, you can see the wonder, the beauty, the order of it. It's phenomenal, mind-boggling. Whether you're looking at something as simple as a beautiful sunset, or I've known people who were looking at a microscope in a lab who had an almost ecstatic experience seeing the wonderful order at a microscopic level. The created order, which we can marvel at properly, is not God. That's where polytheism gets away. Superstition is another one. Have any of you ever been superstitious? Okay. Any baseball players in here? Anybody who played baseball, let's say high school, college, whatever? Okay. Baseball players are notoriously superstitious. Okay. let's say they get in a good hitting groove. I just remember I grew up, now again, I have to hide behind the podium when I say this, but I grew up as a New York Yankee fan because that was the local team. And there was a guy who was a great all-star shortstop, was in the Hall of Fame and so forth. The guy had a little rule. He chewed bubble gum during things, and he would always stick bubble gum on his hat if he had a hit in the game. He was a good hitter, he was a great player. But he'd always stick bubble gum in his hat as long as he did, and then he'd get rid of it and clean it up after he had a game where he didn't hit well. Well, the guy unfortunately was a pretty good hitter, and this stuff kind of developed a stink after a while, mixing with sweat and everything else. It was terrible. The guys finally got on him about it. Okay, that's superstition. Don't give credit to something trivial that has no bearing on it. That's superstition. It departs from worship. It moves away from it. It gives power again to creatures or creation over us. Irreligion, tempting God in word and deed, sacrilege, profane sacred persons or things. Okay? We saw some of that in the gospel reading a couple weeks ago where the devil tempted Jesus, the first Sunday of Lent, turn these rocks into loaves of bread and all this kind of thing. He's trying to tempt God, trying to manipulate God. Atheism, where we reject the existence of God, often founded on a false concept of human autonomy. Okay? Again, I've known atheists who intellectually battled it and fought it and dealt with it and so forth. I can respect that. But sometimes people are, I'm an atheist just because they don't want anything to exert any control on them or put any limits on them. I can do what I want, sound like an adolescent. That pride and ego is much greater than reality in their mind. Or agnosticism. Are you familiar with agnosticism? How many is that a Greek term? Unfamiliar? Agnosticism? Agnosticism is common in our day, and it comes from a Greek term meaning to know nothing. It affirms that nothing can be known about God. There may be a God, there may not. We can't know anything about him. Not so. We're given an intellect. And it usually involves a kind of indifferentism, where, it could be anything. Practically it becomes atheism. The person may have a certain opening to God, but they function as if they're an atheist. Has the same effect. No demands upon me. Okay? It denies God's gift of reason to us as a person. Okay. Let's move on to the second commandment. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Let me go on further here in the quote. For the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Now this is sometimes a hard one for people to understand. This commandment fosters respect for God. Now there's many ways we can disrespect God. I've put just a rash of pictures over here that in my notion express it. Some of these won't be very clear. I hope some will. Have any of you ever had to testify in court? Nobody? Good. I did once. Is that a serious business? Why? You're universally nodding yes, those of you who are still awake. Why is that serious? I've taken an oath. And I'm taking that oath before him, even if it's not in the words. What would happen to our justice system if people lie under oath all the time? Yeah, it breaks down. Okay? People lie under oath, you got serious trouble. But some of the other things, the lesser things we do, that's kind of the obvious one. I think of our news media. These are two anchors from somewhere I threw up there. Our news media is hardly in the business of truth anymore. Hasn't been for quite a long time. And that's sad, and that hurts our society. Osama bin Laden promoted a very warped version of even Islam and somehow made it God's will to kill 3,000 innocent people? No. Caesar. The thumb goes up, you live. The thumb goes down, you die, acting as if he's God. This is a picture above where Mexican authorities were putting to death Miguel Pro. Okay, it's a drawing of it. He was a priest back around 1900, roughly. There were kind of secular where the government was trying to crush out the faith and kill a lot of folks. Okay. Yeah. Or even someone who goes, this guy claims to be a Christian atheist, reject God but follow Jesus. That kind of insanity. No, it disrespects God. Pontius Pilate with Peter in the piece of artwork. What is truth? Truth was standing right in front of him. And he said, what is truth? Or let's pick on a Catholic. This is Cardinal McCarrick, perhaps the most wayward, upward official in the Catholic Church during the whole scandal. Here we see him before the World Economic Forum. He got very popular out in the secular world because he said what they wanted to hear all the time. He was a seriously abusive man sexually. Finally, justice got to him. It forbids the misuse of God's sacred name. So you cannot call in the name of God to justify a crime. Okay? Can't do that. Perjury is a grave example of that. Blasphemy, uttering against God inwardly or outwardly, words of hatred, reproach, or defiance. Be careful of your anger sometimes that may go toward God when something goes wrong in life. Okay? We have to be careful publicly with this where that language extends to the church, saints, sacred things, to provoke others to repudiate religion. You know, God, Jesus particularly, died to give us this gift. We ought to never throw that under a bus. Cursing. Now, we don't mean any bad word you've ever said. There are many what we might call cuss words that are not truly cursing, taking the Lord's name. But cursing, acting contrary to love. Unfaithfulness to promises made in the name of God. I swear to God I'll do this for you. And then I totally, deliberately ignore it. Can't do that. We've got to be very careful of the oaths we take. Okay? And now the third commandment. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth and rested on the seventh day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Okay. What does this mean, by the way, for a Catholic? Minimally. What are we required to do? Attend Mass. Now, the church is very liberal on this now, even more than when I was a kid. You can attend Mass, assuming it is the Mass of Sunday, from 4, I think as early as 4 o'clock you can have them. What are called the anticipatory Masses on Saturday night. And does anybody know what the latest Mass in the Twin Cities is now? It used to be 9 o'clock. I don't know if anybody still, St. Lawrence used to have one. You have a wide range of time in which you can attend Mass, okay? And we are required to do that. Now you're probably already thinking, well, what would be the exceptions to that? Well, let's hit the obvious ones first. What would be the exceptions to that? Illness. If you're seriously ill, don't go. Don't bring your germs to share with the rest of us, if nothing else, right? But no, if you're ill, if it's going to harm you or risk your health to go, do not go. Yeah, Can anybody think of another one?
Caring for somebody else who's ill.
Yeah, let's say you have to care for an ill person, and there's no practical way for you to not care for that person, and that means not going to Mass. That might be a requirement. Yeah. Unsafe travel. Okay. Yeah, let's say it's truly unsafe. Now, I can't make that claim. I live within a mile of my parish. It would have to really be bad out that I couldn't walk it. Maybe someday it would be, but and I've on a couple of occasions walked to church simply because there was no other way to get there. It wasn't practical to try to drive it. But what if you lived 40 miles from the nearest church? Okay. Now, we're urbanites, and you probably think, well, that doesn't happen. There's a Catholic church every few miles. Yeah, here there is. But when you get out in rural lands, particularly in typically non-Catholic, I missed Mass once due to travel. I was in Utah. My wife and I were trying to find a Catholic church, and we could not find one. That was before. They have online, by the way, catholicmass.com or .org. I can't remember. You can type it in, and it'll locate you and where I'm. And in my travels, we found some interesting churches along the way to do that. But yeah, we need to go to Mass. Now, let's get into why. Why is this commandment important? Is this just a burden on us? No. Let's start with over on the right. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. From Mark 2. Now, let's try to explain the context to this. Up above, you see a picture of a Pharisee. The Pharisees were fanatics on the Sabbath, and they were largely governing the kind of religious side of Jewish society at the time of Christ. They really were the most powerful influence. You couldn't do anything on a Sabbath. Jesus, fed people, healed people on the Sabbath, and he got in trouble for it by the Pharisees. They were trying to trap him all the time. They totally misunderstood it. What does it mean to observe and keep sacred this day? Christ gives this day its authentic interpretation, not the Pharisees. Okay? They were not off on everything, but on this, they were way off. What is it? It's the day of the new creation ushered in by the resurrection of Christ. The greatest event that has ever happened, nothing will ever top it, is the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Okay? That's what we celebrate every Sunday. That's why. It's the first of all days. It's the first of all feasts. So we're in Lent now. Now, have any of you given up anything for Lent? I've given up a few things. Okay. Could you guess what one of the things I've given up is? Chocolate. Yep. What do I do on Sundays during Lent? Who said that? Amen. I eat chocolate. Sundays are not part of Lent. Now, some people who approach it more of a dietary approach might choose not to do it, abstain. Okay, that's fine. No problem with that. Nothing wrong with that. But this is a day of feast, not of fast. Okay? So yes, I've had a bowl of chocolate ice cream the last 2 Sundays. Probably will for the next 4. Okay?
Are you saving all the chocolate from your way to eat it on Sunday?
I like the way this lady thinks. No, I'm not. I'm trying to resist, keep it down to 1. A large one, but 1, Yeah, okay. It proclaims the eternal rest in God. That's what the Sabbath has always been about. In our own country, I don't know if you know this, up until about 1960, you saw in most states they had blue laws, which protected the Sabbath to a degree. In my home state, they had a law that no business could be open 7 days a week. Now, what that meant in a fairly pluralistic state, most were still Christians, and so they would probably choose to have their businesses closed on Sundays. We were blessed to have some Jewish folks around who closed them on Saturdays. So on the way home from Mass, we could stop at the Jewish delicatessen, pick up some hard rolls and, little treats. We always had a nice big brunch on Sunday morning after Mass. Even the few, there weren't many at the time, but those of Islam celebrated on Friday. They could do that. Blue laws were quite common. Okay. Unfortunately, that has all kind of disappeared. But the idea was we need a day of rest. Even the slaves in the American South usually got Sundays off. We sometimes don't give ourselves that gift. Again, what is this for? It allows us as Catholics to participate in the Eucharist of the Lord, which is most important, refrain from activities which impede the worship of God, and disturb the joy proper to the day of the Lord. Notice it's not tightly strict. You cannot do this, you cannot do that. Do any of you remember Father Benedict Rochelle? He passed away a few years ago, but he was on EWTN. Well, he grew up just outside of New York City, and a lot of people in his neighborhood were Jews. New York City has a high Jewish population. And they had Orthodox Jews around him. They would not turn on a light switch on the Sabbath. Well, they'd hire the good Catholic boy who went on to become a very, very fine priest. He said he remembers going over there to turn on their lights or do small things like that. Now, that's not what the Sabbath was meant for. And if you read through the New Testament, you'll see Christ. Would you not pull I forget what animal, your ox doesn't fall, what fell into the well, Father? Help me out. I'm trying to think.
It's a ditch, you mean?
Fell into the ditch, yeah. Some animal wouldn't haul them out. Yeah, you would. Okay,
Well, it's an ox. In that situation, if your neighbor's ox falls into a ditch.
Yeah, you help them get it out. Okay, there are things that, if your car breaks down on the side of the road, are you going to sit there till Monday? No. Get out and try to fix it. Change the tire, whatever it needs. So again, civil society, even it talks about in the compendium, needs to allow for leisure, okay, for the Sabbath. Again, it doesn't forbid any type of work. Necessary work may be done. It encourages rest, leisure, recreation, meditation, silence, study, good works, especially for the sick and the elderly. What I remember growing up in the days of blue laws, you weren't going to go out and go shopping because hardly anything was open. We usually visited our grandparents almost every Sunday. We usually had dinner with them, with family time, okay? And so again, this is what this commandment does. Again, not because God needs it, but because we do. Again, the Sabbath, in our case, Sunday, the Lord's Day, is meant for us. We need this, okay? Father, I think I'm done flapping my jaws here. I'm guessing you probably have something you'd like to talk about, or? Oh, okay. Well, welcome. Good to have you there.
I'm just resting leisurely.
Okay, yeah, all right. Any questions on anything? We've touched on a fair number of things, and like I say, I'll be blessed to be with you. Next week, we'll cover commandments 4, 5, and 6, okay? We'll begin to get into the commandments of neighbor. So any questions for Father or myself on this? Going once. Going twice. Oh, there we go. Harrison.
Yes, I have a question. So there's a lot of stuff up here about what the Sabbath doesn't ban you from doing any type of work. Obviously, the church encourages you to go to Mass on Sunday.
Right.
Is there anything else that the church said you should do on Sunday or be good to do on Sunday? I assume maybe something adoration would be beneficial.
Certainly perfectly fine. But notice, what's the only thing it specifies we need to do if possible? Yeah, tenets. That's the highest thing we have. It's the greatest gift we have. And so it gives us a latitude to make prudent decisions. For example, okay, tell me if I'm breaking this. I have some hobbies: woodworking, gardening. I'm kind of one of those crazy DIY fix-it guys. I do some of that on Sunday. I particularly like to woodwork sometimes on a Sunday afternoon. If we're not doing any family thing for an hour, I might go down to the shop and make sawdust for a while. Am I breaking the commandment? No, because this is leisure for me. Now, for the guy who works in a cabinet shop 5 or 6 days a week, first of all, I doubt he would want to, but no, this would not be appropriate for him. But for me, I work predominantly in the world of people and all that. And once in a while, wood doesn't tend to argue with you. It does occasionally. When it warps and twists, if you've ever worked with it, it does. But yeah, what's that? That was good. I got to use that. Okay. Oh, okay. I'm a firm believer the pun is the highest.
You're not selling what you're making.
Yeah. Yep. So again, think of it as leisure in the broadest sense of the word. We sometimes, as Americans, think leisure is sitting on a couch, like a couch potato, maybe blinded. Leisure is, it is, I know how hard these guys work and they need some time like that and they rarely get it. But leisure is a much broader thing. Conversation, reading a good book, visiting, all good stuff. And particularly, as it said, to visit like extended family. Like say, I would guess conservatively, we had meals with my grandparents at least every other Sunday growing up. At least, probably a bit more than that.
I know, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No.
My question was, so if I do something on the Sabbath where I'm not working, but I'm causing someone else to have to work.
Okay.
How is that viewed?
So let's say this Sunday, because I don't treat it as a day of fast.
You're going to church, you're making me work.
Yeah. And even in my small role in the church, I've had to teach a lot on Sundays because that's when the people are there. That happens. How would we answer that? Now, and this is where it can become a little bit of a dog chasing its tail if we're not careful. Let's say this Sunday, I go to, you ever heard of Nelson's Ice Cream in Stillwater? Okay, if you've never been there, look it up. Someday when you're out in the area, go there. Buy the smallest one you can find because they're going to give you a lot. It's not cheap, but it's really good. Okay, so I go to Nelson's and get the Lollapalooza chocolate this Sunday. Am I making somebody work? Yeah, I mean, you watch these people, they got forearms like this from scooping ice cream and piling it so carefully. Yeah, they're working. Now, that's not, it's a service. It's not an unreasonable thing to do. Now, in general, we do have to govern our lives in such a way that we're trying not to always work on Sunday. But think of things like anybody here in the medical field. Okay? We need people to take care of people on Sundays. We can't just say, hey, stay in the hospital. We'll check on you on Monday. A lot of those IVs will run out. Yeah, so again, there's always this balance that has to come into play. I don't know if, Father, you have any better answer than I do on that. You very well may. How to govern that.
All I would say is always remember there's a spirit of the law, and that is, what are you trying to avoid? You want to avoid other people working too much if possible. So I do try to make it a point not to shop on a Sunday. And it does happen where it's the only afternoon off I have. And the only time I've ever done it that I know of recently was I think I had to prepare for a meal that night and I didn't have a chance because I was working all the other. So I mean, again, it's the spirit of the law, right? I know the places are going to be open in America. In Germany, in some parts, they're not open. In Germany, they call it a Roytag, a rest day. And that is the spirit of the law. My rest day is the next day. It's Monday usually. And so, interesting enough, the Southern Germans, they have to take a day of rest, so even the managers get to have a rest. It's kind of cool. That's a beautiful spirit of the law. I don't know if the Germans are going to keep those laws. The Roytag Day is what they would call it. The only other thing I would want to add is a convert that I know many years ago said, the reason why I only go to church spend time with family, and then do self-improvement reading. Now listen to this. The only reason why I only go to church, spend time with family, and do some reading, self-improvement, is because there's nothing better to do. Think about that. There is nothing better to do than to worship God, spend time with your family, and give yourself a little mental and spiritual spa. There's nothing better to do. And I'll never forget when he told me that. He told me that 22 years ago or something.
Yeah,
He
that's
was in a class like this. Actually, because he was a former missionary, he got little private classes.
Mhm.
So he really knew what he was doing. But I'll never forget that. That's changed my outlook.
Yeah.
I've got nothing better to do. You know, so
yeah. Because I don't know about you guys, and I suffer from this because I'm a workaholic. I oftentimes it takes me a little while to get to leisure because I think I got to be getting something done. I got to be checking a box on something or something like that. Not a good way to live.
and I try not to answer emails.
Mhm.
So Sunday afternoon and Monday, because if people need me that bad, it's called the life and death emergency number.
Yeah. Okay, I think we've
Yeah.
hit it's 8 o'clock officially. Father, do you want to talk to?
There are,
Yeah.
I'll be meeting Melina in just a moment. Is there anyone else here who's going to Holy Family that I've not either gotten your contact info or I haven't set up a meeting yet? Just not with you, but you're with someone else, right? Okay. No. Well, I know you. We still have to have a meeting?
I don't know.
I think so. Christelle, I think, yeah, we could still at least briefly talk, but obviously I know your situation a little bit better. Anyone else who is going to Holy Family that I haven't met with? Did I make an appointment with you?
I don't think you did. Okay. Gave you.
Did I get your contact info?
You did.
Okay, I'm gonna ask you to give me good guilt and email me tonight and say, Father, we have to have a meeting in preparation for your coming into the faith. Right, and I know it's gonna be more timing or something like that. Baptismal certificates, anyone from our parish or other parishes, don't forget, if you are baptized, we'll need your baptismal certificates. Either me or give them to Father. You're at Our Lady of the Lake, or no, are you here? And I need a meeting with you then. I need your names again, sorry.
I'm Melina.
You're oh, great.
Yeah.
Sorry. Thank you. One of the gifts has been I haven't had to teach every single class.
One of
That
the
also
curses.
means
Yeah.
One of the curses is I haven't taught
Yep.
all the classes. So sorry, Melina.
I was talking about that at the beginning tonight. That's the one thing I missed this year is,
Yeah.
last year you and I did it all,
Yeah.
and as a result, I felt I got to know people better and that kind of thing. So, yeah, we missed that.
And a clarification, am I doing next week or are you?
I'm up next week.
You are.
Yeah, you had me.
So I was wrong when I told you I'd be up next week. It's fine. It's all yours.
You
It's
don't
all
mind it?
yours.
Okay, I'm happy to take it.
It's
all prepared.
Yours.
Good.
Thank you. And I'll get a hold of you. And then have I met with you or? Okay. Very good.
Okay.
Good. Thank you, one and all.
All right.
And with a prayer?
Why don't you end with a blessing or prayer? You do it.
Blessing. Let's
I'll leave you in charge.
In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, we ask you to send your blessings upon these catechumens and candidates and their sponsors. Continue to fill them with a prevenient, it means coming before grace of the Holy Spirit. Enliven their prevenient faith and their hope and their love. Clarify any questions that they have, give them peace. And also, Lord, help them to remain close to you. And always bless us who teach. Make sure that we practice what we preach. Benedictio Deo Potentis, Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, descendat super vos et maneat semper. Amen. God bless you. What I said was, may the blessing of Almighty God, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit descend upon you and remain with you forever. Take care, everyone.
Okay. Good to see you guys. See you next week.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.